Guys, thank you so much for showing your interest in Uber. This seems like a pretty full room, so really exciting to be presenting to you today. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the future of air mobility, what that means for our cities and the people that live in them. Talk to you about congestion, pollution, parking, and how Uber is trying to reduce that in our cities, and how we're going to do that by getting private car ownership for public good. And the final piece that I'll talk to you about is really how our technology is starting to transform our cities in a pretty different way. There's tons of data in here, so hopefully you'll find it interesting. But let's dive into the problem. Okay, so it's really easy to demonize the car. There are more than 1 billion of them in the world today. It's the equivalent of the US and Europe's populations combined, okay? But it's not the car itself that is the problem, it's how we use it, okay? Next time you're at a traffic light or you're stuck in some congestion, look to your right, look to your left, look at the car next to you, and you'll likely see there's one person in that car. Yeah? Yeah. And it's normally, yeah, all the time. And it's normally just the driver. Single car occupancy is causing a huge issue in our cities, and it comes at a considerable cost, a public cost that we don't often consider. People spend up to 2 weeks of their working life just sat in traffic each year. That's a huge amount of time. That's lost time with your family, lost time with your friends, just a whole lot of stress that you don't need. And in fact, 22% of the world's CO2 emissions come from cars. What's crazy is that that's only 5% of the problem, because 95% of the time, they're sat still in a car park, just a place to store hunks of steel. It's crazy when you think about it. What could we have done with that land? We could build more schools, we could have more houses, we could have more bike lanes, parks, you get the point. But it's by urban design that we're forcing people to own a private car. So when we build flats, offices in a city, we actually put parking spaces as an allocated thing as part of these buildings, right? You have to have parking. And so people are like, well, I have the parking spaces there, I can use my car, get to the office, get back to my flat. It makes sense to own a private car. And this trend continues, even in a city like New York, okay? Massive amount of public transport infrastructure, but not far-reaching enough to reach your front door. So people on lower incomes, people that can't quite afford or reach that transport infrastructure, their last option really is to consider using a private car. And then you look towards the fact that they've also, once they've bought that car, they're just obviously going to start using it. 2 million people drive into Manhattan every day, and that's because that trend will just continue to grow should private car ownership continue to grow. Okay. All right, I'm trying to get interactive here. Hands up if you've used Uber before. This always impresses me every time. When our founders first designed the app, we weren't thinking about all what I've just mentioned. It was merely just touching a button and getting a car to your location that would get you to your destination. And it was only really until Uber started to take off, and ride sharing as a concept took off, that we start to realize that today's transport ecosystem is unequal, it's inefficient, and quite frankly, it's insufficient. There's good news, people, because there is a world that looks less like a traffic jam and less like a parking lot. Okay? And that's a world where people share rides, and where we offer affordable and reliable alternatives to owning a private car. Affordability and reliability. The two things I'm just going to pitch into now, okay? This is Southern California, LA, 100 square miles of metropolitan space. This visual basically shows that Uber over time is so far-reaching that we're starting to reach every corner of that space. 100 square miles of space. We're so far-reaching now that people can touch a button and get a car within 10 minutes. That's for us becoming more reliable, and obviously suggesting giving those people on lower incomes that I just mentioned out in the suburbs an alternative to owning a private car. But as I say, it can't just be reliability. We need affordability. So Uber Pool. Hands up if you used the Uber Pool. Yes. Okay, only 3 people. So affordability is super core to this, okay? And it's where we need to get to. Once you get reliability, we start to think about affordability. Pooling, car sharing, was thought about in the World War II. It was also thought about in the oil crisis in the 1970s. Policymakers were all thinking about this. but the technology wasn't there to facilitate it. So when Uber started to grow, our engineers had a bit of a breakthrough, and they realized that there was a bunch of people wanting to go from one location to the same destination at the same time. And so we had this question: would people share a trip for a reduced fare? Hands up if you would do that. Wow, okay, that's good. So, when we launched this and we started to consider it, okay, and I should have probably mentioned the whole theory behind it. The idea is that if you share a ride, you get a reduced fare because you're sharing a car with a bunch of other people that you don't know. The second is the driver earns a bunch more money because, well, they have more bums on seats. And the third is, well, for city and the policymakers and everybody in the city, it makes so much sense to them because it means more and more people are getting into fewer cars. And so you can see where I'm going. We're starting to reduce private car ownership. This is San Francisco. It's a city where 50% of our user base choose Uber Pool, okay, as an option. It's a city where 20% of our user base use it all the time. And you can see just here, this is what the city used to look like. So I should probably use the key here. There's higher traffic in the city. This was pre-Uber Pool. Post-Uber Pool, this is what's now, with Uber Pool in place, this is what's happening now. Reduced congestion within the city. An interesting stat from Morgan Stanley, 4% of rides today are shared amongst all transport rides across the world. They expect that to rise to 25% by 2030. Okay, when that happens, our congestion and the things that are going to be happening in our cities are going to transform. My point is that we are in reaching distance of a new future. Okay, so talked about affordability, talked about reliability. There's a big question: does Uber compete with public transport? Okay, a lot of policymakers are like, well, no, you guys are ruining the show. We want to be making sure that we complement public transport, and we absolutely do. It's a real case study. Okay, so when London launched the night tube, okay, this is zone 1, we were this was like a live case for us because we were about to realize, well, does Uber actually complement public transport? And what we started to see was actually a reduction in the number of pickups in zone 1 because people were taking the tube out to zone 2 and to zone 3, and we were seeing an increase in the number of pickups happening in their outer zones because people were using it as a first mile and last mile option. Uber is becoming a first mile, last mile option, and that is what is core to our mission now. And it's why I'm actually quite excited to show you the next slide, which is Uber as a platform. These screenshots aren't really shown worldwide. This is something I'm trying to let you into. This is what we want the app to look like in the future, okay? Let me explain. We basically want to have as many modes in the app as possible at the touch of a button. The idea you can get a bus, a tram, a train, an Uber, whatever it is, a bike, at the touch of a button. It will give you one fare for your entire trip, and it will happen seamlessly and integrated. We've already acquired different modes. We acquired Jump Bike. Has anyone heard of Jump Bike? So basically, Jump Bike is an electric bike. We're going to be bringing them to the UK very soon, hopefully. But the excitement about it is that basically it gives you all the enjoyment with cycling and takes away all the effort that comes with it. We're not going to try and drive obesity rates, okay? But what we're trying to say is that it'd be a more enjoyable way to commute around your city when you're wearing a suit trying to get to work. That's a mode we've already acquired. You've probably seen scooters around a lot of cities in the US. I was in Spain recently. We saw scooters everywhere, just dashed around. It's another company we've partnered with is Lime Scooter. But anyway, more modes at the touch of a button. And we're going to be working with lots of private and public transport infrastructure to bring it all into one app. So that's going to happen in the next sort of 3 to 4 or 5 years, okay? But let's fast forward it even more. So this is already happening in a few cities, and we've already seen the dramas that have come with it. I think maybe some of you were in a presentation before, which kind of shows how advanced the technology is to this, but it's not quite there yet. With autonomous vehicles, they have a lot to do in terms of weather, understanding the weather. So when it's raining or the conditions are bad, the vehicle doesn't react very well. Another is new road conditions. We got new road when you're setting up new construction on the road, it doesn't react to that very well. So we've got safety drivers in all of our autonomous vehicles where they're operating. The interesting thing about this is that when we do start to launch this, I'm excited about, I guess, these cars, is that with the stat here, the OECD said it themselves, is that a shared self-driving service will reduce the number of cars on the road by 90%. 90%. Our worlds will look totally different when we reach that. I don't know when it will be, but that was their point, was that literally we will have more parks, more hospitals, a totally transformed city that operates very, very differently. Now, I didn't want to bring you on to this, but I thought, given I have to try and inspire you to some extent, I wanted to show you basically one of our newest products, and it's Uber Air. I feel like this is like my moment to be like Steve Jobs. So Uber Air is basically on-demand aviation. And when I talk about congestion, and I mentioned earlier the amount of time we spend in traffic when you're sat just 2 weeks of your life each year stuck in traffic, this is the sort of thing that's going to bypass that. So I'm not going to talk to each of these, just watch them and enjoy them. But basically, the technology and how it works is almost like a network of drones that can carry people, okay? And instead of having to repurpose and build lots and lots of new infrastructure around our cities, including rails, roads, the great thing about these is they basically will go, the drones will go up, vertical takeoff, and landing. They're VTOLs. And so basically, you will be able to go to what you call a vertiport, which will be a repurposed building, a skyscraper of some sort. And at the top, we will facilitate these VTOLs to take you around cities. So here's some of the ideas, repurposing the tops of buildings. So I wanted to finish on this. So much is great about living in our city. There's so much that we need to do to progress. But the takeaway is that if we can start sharing rides and start building new, affordable, and more reliable options to travel, we will reach a place where our congestion, the parking, and everything else will change the way our cities look for the future. Okay? Thank you for listening.